give you the opportunity to sort of help us understand when quantum mechanics was first discussed, when Einstein was having these conversations with Planck, with Bohr, there was a whole community of dudes. And what we took from that era of physics was we can make a bomb that can decimate people, right? And that's what people think about, right? That's the Oppenheimer conversation. Like, we can split an atom. Like, what is that, right? But there was an entire esoteric set of conversations going on where the inexplicable things that even quantum mechanics couldn't describe were in many cases discussed as an opening to what if. What if there's a plane, an electron field, a consciousness field? All these terms are virtually indistinguishable. And people who have no scientific background have described it, they've lived it, they've experienced it, and they've tried to transmit it to us. And then physics comes along and says, we also can explain this. And the things we can't explain probably exist in this beautiful metaphysical stew. And what if God exists, right? Where does that land us today in terms of trying to frame what we want our reality to look like? Does it look like everybody needs to quit their jobs and go do mushrooms in the desert? What are we talking about?
I mean, I think that the dangers of like this certainty, if you have this metaphysical certainty, is that you say, this is not possible and this cannot happen. Things like synchronicity, which Carl Gustav Jung came up with. And he had discussions with Wolfgang Pauli, the physicist, and they tried to figure out together, like, what could this look like if there's this like additional causal layer above reality, which we cannot really understand from our perspective, but it has order and meaning in it. This is such a thing in human experience that still today, this is a concept. People still relate to that. Now, of course, you can say, yeah, that's because people are stupid and your mind just does pattern recognition, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But again, that's the thing. Like, in your metaphysical framing, if you don't know that that's a belief and a choice, then you're not so careful with saying what's possible or not. A recent book I bought, which appeared in the Routledge academic publishing house, and it's called Dark Cognition, and it's 2 years old. And it's what we know about these supernatural effects, and that they probably are true. And this is appearing in a mainstream academic publishing house, which I find amazing, because not too long ago this was all just like, this is not possible. Because of course, if you're framed in this physicalist worldview and you see such a book, then you have two reactions. I mean, one reaction is, this isn't true. So what's happening? Either the people are lying, they're frauds, or they're just incompetent. That's it. That's the explanation. So you don't have to bother or engage with the tons of data.
And that's actually a very non-scientific approach.
It's just bias. It's just your personal bias.
Well, right. And with all due respect to my teenagers who are, 17 and 20, that's the way a cynical, intelligent 17 or 20-year-old would approach it. Like, that doesn't make sense. That's bullshit. You're all on drugs.
I can't understand it, so it's not true.
Right. And that's the least scientific way to approach things. So to take the notion of what if psi phenomenon are true? What if synchronicity is not just what hippies and people who can't hold down a job like to base their life on? What if synchronicity is actually a confluence, right, of patterning? It's exactly. It's an acknowledgement and a recognition that the way that molecules line up, the way that your brain understands patterns, is actually indicative of a larger plane or field that we may not yet understand or be able to explain, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Exactly. Recently, I was listening to a podcast with Michael Levin, the biologist who is doing all these crazy experiments with sort of electrical fields of like organisms, and he claims that actually there's cognition on every level. You have cognition in tissue, in cells. It's not just the brain.
The entire fascia system, which we thought was just blobs, it's not. It's actually an interactive system that when you touch something on your shoulder, it does ripple through your body. And we used to think fascia was just a bunch of blobs in your body. Turns out it's not. And it's like a consciousness of your system.
This idea of this cosmic intelligence, consciousness that's behind the physical, which is propping up the physical, if that's true, what would it look like? What could the effects be? And he was thinking, maybe synchronicity, which means that there's a higher ordering principle we haven't discovered, but it's actually mapping onto our everyday lives. And that's another thing which I find, if you're stuck in this sort of physicalist, reductionistic worldview, I find it like, I call it cosmic nihilism, because it's really sad. It tells you, look, you don't matter. Everything is random. There's no purpose, and you die, and that was it, and just grow up and deal with it, and sorry, we can't help you if you don't like that. And anything else is just wishful thinking and you being immature. And I find the converse with idealism is that you basically are asked to work with your own consciousness. I mean, I call the shamans, mystics, meditators, and psychonauts the masters of consciousness, because they just were working with their consciousness, which is not something that we in the West are very good at, because our sort of expertise was, hey, look out into the world and try and figure out what's happening out there and not inside. So we're kind of behind there on the learning curve. And I find this if you're open to working with your consciousness and seeing what's happening in there. So you don't have to take psychedelics. You can meditate. You can sit in a forest. You can do drumming or singing or holotropic breathwork, whatever. But just that you start to sort of see what can emerge in your own consciousness. And this is kind of a transformational thing, because it seems, I mean, for me, the goal there is that you just try and be a happier person.
You have this sort of description of the problem plaguing us, right? I like to quote people directly to them when your words are so good. Our current era is defined by deeply troubling crises. You list the environment, economic inequality, the deterioration of social cohesion, the rise of entrenched ideologies, the rejection of a shared reality in a post-truth world that weaponizes ignorance and incites outrage. I mean, add to that the recent research that just came out that young people are less conscientious, more neurotic, less able to sort of function with focus, with intention, with even a feeling of purpose. So we're potentially descending into a sort of dystopian future. And for those of us who've ever heard about science fiction, yeah, there's many aspects of what's happening that feels very, very scary. And as someone who watches a lot of true crime documentaries, we can start to feel like it's everywhere. Whatever this dystopia is, it's kind of, we're numbing ourselves with social media. We're numbing ourselves with purchasing. We're numbing ourselves with, the wine that they keep selling to middle-aged ladies. We're doing our best here, So if these are the problems, and one of the things, Jonathan and I have talked about really since this podcast started, the notion of psychedelic drugs in particular, which can be used therapeutically and even which are used recreationally. Timothy Leary used to talk about this. Rick Doblin talks about it. If you give enough people access to a higher level of consciousness, which inevitably leads to feeling loved, feeling part of something bigger, not being able to imagine killing other people, even if you've been told that they are your enemy, that expanded consciousness does not allow governments to put people in uniforms and send them across the world to kill strangers. So the notion of a government wanting to control our access to our own consciousness makes a lot of sense in that sense. Where do you see the sort of fight for our own access to consciousness as a way to sort of fight against the dystopia that we seem to all be falling into?
Maybe it's not really our fault in the sense that it feels so real to sense or to have the feeling that you're an individual and kind of disconnected from everyone else. So kind of the first thing which you should try and cultivate is sort of reimagine or just remember the connection of like at least life as a matrix. But then if idealism is true, basically, yeah, this is all connected in the same substance and this is a reality. So kind of your feeling of identity, which is probably one of the root causes of a lot of problems, because it's the you versus me. Because if my sort of light cone of compassion, another word borrowed from Michael Levin, is really small, then yeah, I'm not going to care about anything. But if it's big, I'm going to include animals and plants and the ecosystem, stuff like that. And that's probably the first illusion that you have to sort of work against, where your sober waking mind is telling you, hey, we are all disconnected and it's only me and I have to fight for survival.